Joe Rogan had the brilliant atheist and neuroscientist Sam Harris on his podcast, and at one point, Harris argued that free will doesn't exist. So let's listen to him in his own words sum up his position, and then I want to come back and break it down.
The basic case against free will is this. It's twofold. One is that, and again, it's the obverse of this sense of self. It's the other side of the coin, where you feel like you're a thinker of thoughts. You feel like you're the author of intentions. You feel like you are a subject. And commensurate with that feeling is the sense that you are in a position to do what it is you do, to decide to do. I can decide to lift my left hand, or I can decide to lift my right hand, and I can deliberate between the two, and I can have reasons for one or reasons for the other. And I'm in the driver's seat. I really am. And then if you and so that's where everyone's starting. The problem with that is, objectively, we know that everything that you're consciously aware of, all your thoughts and your intentions and your impulses, and your impulses to resist those impulses. I mean, whatever's coming up for you, we know that's all preceded by events in your nervous system of which you're not aware and which you didn't create. And the state of your brain in this moment, it's in every sense, is the product of variables that you are not responsible for. You didn't pick your parents. You didn't pick your genes. You didn't sculpt your genes. You didn't pick the environment in which your genome was going to be expressed. You didn't pick the way your interaction with the world and other people sculpted the microstructure of your brain so as to give you the brain you have. You didn't pick the number of receptors you have of every type at every synapse. You didn't pick all the charges that are currently in place in your brain at this moment. You haven't created your neurophysiology, and yet your neurophysiology is going to give rise to every next thought and intention that shows up for you.
So that's a really, really interesting argument, and I have to admit, when it came to the issue of free will versus determinism, so do you get to choose what you're doing, or is it, more hardwired in you, or determined, as is laid out in the term itself, determinism? I used to think that pretty much all rational people fell on the side of free will, and the only people who argued in favor of determinism were religious people, were people who would say, yeah, everything is determined in the sense that God has a plan for you, and he wrote it out, and you're going according to that plan, and you might think you have free will, but you don't because God already authored your life. So I used to think it was this clear, definitive thing where all the smart people were on one side and all the silly people were on the other side. But, of course, Sam Harris is one of the reasons why he's famous is that he's one of the new atheists, and he's vehemently anti-religion. He doesn't believe in God. In fact, I think his books really helped change my perspective on things and really helped me grow as a person and were really informative and interesting. Letter to a Christian Nation, End of Faith. If you haven't read them, I highly recommend reading them. Eye-opening books, fantastic arguments, and he's a really smart guy. And then as I grew and I started reading more about it, I came to realize that my gut position on how the debate was split up was totally wrong. That there are plenty of very smart people who actually believe in determinism, and it's not just this goofy idea that, like, God has, made a plan for you and you're following accordingly. And he basically gave us a high-minded argument in favor of determinism, and an argument that suggests that we don't have free will. However, I think he's both right and wrong. So what I mean by that is this. When we talk about free will versus determinism, we have this human need to make it an on or off thing, a black or white thing, a yes or no thing. And it's very similar to the nature versus nurture debate also. How I've spoken about this before, how there are people who are in the nature camp and they say, well, everything is basically hardwired in you, it's in your genetics, it's in your DNA, and you act according to that. That's the determining factor in everything is your nature. And there are other people that say, no, it was your environment that shaped everything about you. You were a lump of clay and then the environment molded you, and then that's why you act the way you act. And I came along and said, you're both right, actually. For some things, it's pure nature. Only nature goes into it. I like to think sexuality is one of those things, right? Where it's like you can't really choose who you're attracted to. You're attracted to who you're attracted to. For other things, it's nurture, right? So I argue that like the amount of money you make, okay, like what your job is, that's more nurture. There's a lot of things in your environment, a lot of variables that led to you being in whatever job you're in and making the amount of money you're in terms of who you knew, what your skills are, what your how personable you are, what your social skills are, where you were born, where you're living now, all these other variables. So that would be more pure nurture. And then a lot of things, maybe most things, are a mix of both. It's both nurture and nature, and it's not just on or off, black or white. Well, with what Sam Harris is saying here, I think he bought into this bullshit breakdown and this didactic worldview of it's either all free will or all determinism. I think both are right. And let me explain in more detail what I mean by that. So some people naively think like human beings are capable of anything. And they believe that for a decent reason, because we're able to manipulate our environment. We're the only animal, as far as we know, that could do it to the extent that we've done it. You know, we have science, we have technology. I mean, we created fucking machines that you can get in and fly across the world in a few hours going 800 miles an hour through the sky. Like, we've done so many amazing things that some can start to believe we can do anything, right? So, we can't. There are definite rules. There are definite rules and limits and predispositions, and all these things, we're functioning within a rigid guidelines as human beings. We have hardware or software. It's hardwired in our biology and our physiology. So if you look at it from that perspective and you acknowledge the reality, well, yeah, that's the aspect of us that is deterministic, okay? And we need to acknowledge that and accept that. But then also, within those rigid rules and guidelines that are set up, we do have free will. So, for example, what do I mean by that? So you could take one person with a certain life experience and another person with a very similar, if not identical, life experience, and they're not going to end up making the same decisions. They're not going to end up having the same job. They're not going to end up marrying the same person. Maybe one gets married, one doesn't get married at all. They're not going to end up having the same tastes. They're not going to end up on the exact same life path. There's going to be variation between the two. So how can it be that you can have two people that are almost identical, two people that, you know, are as similar as you could possibly get in the world that we live in, but they make all these different decisions? Maybe one of them has stronger willpower, the other one has shitty willpower, maybe one of them is an alcoholic, the other one, you know, isn't and is a workaholic or is nothing at all, right? And that's where the free will aspect comes in, that we do have these rigid rules and guidelines. That's the deterministic aspect. And the free will aspect is, even within that, you can make your choice.